Hey guys, tonight we slip into a fog-soaked Victorian night, where the street lamps flicker like tired eyelids and the world feels forever on the brink of either progress or a very long nap. You find yourself wandering through the gas-lit damp of London, the air cool and a little metallic, as if someone has just shaken out a pocket full of old coins. Carriages rattle over uneven cobblestones, and somewhere a baker slams an oven door with the kind of confidence you wish you had at 3 a.m. A mild joke slips in here, soft and sleepy. Of course, you've also been told to avoid screens before bed. So in a way, you and Victorian London are spiritually united in ignoring medical advice. A gentle joke occurs to you. The Victorians were so worried about the morality of insomnia that a sleepless night might have felt like failing a very quiet, socially sanctioned exam. You imagine lying awake, quaking not just at thoughts of taxes or mismanaged appointments, but at the moral ramifications of dozing too late. As you continue down the street, you notice that wealthy neighborhoods take these anxieties especially seriously. Families employ night nurses, purchase specialized bedding, and enforce strict bedtime routines. Conversely, working-class districts contend with late-night factory schedules, lantern-lit streets, and the constant drone of urban life, making moral panic a luxury of those with enough control over time to worry about virtue. A whisper of scholarly curiosity drifts in. Debates about insomnia and morality intersected with gender, class, and occupational expectations. Women, often expected to maintain both households and their own composure, were especially scrutinized for restless nights. Men, conversely, were sometimes excused for wakefulness linked to intellectual labor or business acumen, though never entirely. You feel the layers of judgment folding over society like the thick, damp fog outside. The preacher's voice carries again, now emphasizing moderation and routine. Sleep is depicted as a sacred duty. Late nights are sinful, overthinking is a temptation, and the well-ordered mind reflects the well-ordered spirit. You can imagine Victorian parents invoking these lessons at the dinner table. Eat slowly, speak softly, and for heaven's sake, go to bed before midnight or you'll corrupt your character. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some moralists even believe that certain reading habits, novels, newspapers, or speculative science texts, could overstimulate the imagination and provoke nightmares. A notion that gives you a quiet chuckle. Imagine banning a book for making someone's dreams a little more vivid. Sound familiar? The debate between entertainment and mental well-being has deep roots. You pause for a moment on a damp street corner, listening to the soft patter of rain on cobblestones. There's something oddly comforting about the moral panic, if only because it frames sleeplessness as shared experience. No one is entirely alone in their midnight fretfulness. The city itself seems to acknowledge it, whispering warnings, preaching moderation, and suggesting remedies both scientific and ritualistic. A soft joke drifts in. You can almost see a Victorian pamphlet with the title, Insomnia, Sin, or Science. Decide before midnight. And for a fleeting second, you imagine it printed in a Gothic font, illustrated with small alarmed owls and a distressed moon. As the night carries on, you feel the intertwining threads of morality, anxiety, and societal expectation. Sleeplessness is no longer just a personal inconvenience. It is a lens through which the Victorians examined virtue, duty, and the quiet art of living well. And with that thought, you continue, stepping toward the flickering glow of shops and streetlights where the sleep economy waits, promising comfort, warmth, and meticulously arranged nightwear. You drift past the chapel's echoing admonitions and step into a quieter, cozier part of the city, where shop windows glow warmly against the fog. Here, the nightwear, bedding, and the sleep economy of Victorian London reveal themselves like a hidden treasure trove. Every shop seems to whisper promises of rest, from soft woolen blankets to feather-stuffed mattresses that look like clouds trapped under polished wood. The air smells faintly of lavender and lanolin, a perfume designed to lull both body and mind. As you keep walking, the gas lamps huff their little blue halos. They were once heralded as the pinnacle of modern brilliance, but now people whisper that they overstimulate the nerves. Too bright, some say. Too artificial, others mutter. One fringe tidbit, though. Rumor has it that some Victorians believe the gas itself leaked into bedrooms and caused nightmares. Mainstream historical fact. By the mid-19th century, Londoners had a burgeoning market for sleep-related goods. Bedclothes, warming pans, feather beds, and nightshirts were sold not just for comfort, but as part of a sophisticated understanding of hygiene, health, and occasionally social status. Merchants marketed sleep as both a science and a luxury, one that could be purchased, measured, and carefully curated. A fringe detail catches your eye. Some nightshirts were stitched with secret inner pockets for scented sachets, meant to release a gentle fragrance throughout the night. Chamomile, hops, lavender, tiny invisible companions to guide the wearer into slumber. You can imagine rolling over in a warm bed, inhaling the faint herbal perfume, and thinking, yes, this is what being civilized feels like. You wander through a small boutique lined with shelves of meticulously folded nightwear. Women's nightgowns, long and flowing, are made of soft cotton or flannel, sometimes embroidered with tiny flowers, almost as if to signal that elegance must persist even in unconscious states. Men's pajamas are simpler but still tailored, sometimes with velvet collars or delicate stitching, signaling both comfort and decorum. A minor joke flits into your mind. If you ever see a modern onesie, remember the Victorians invented elegance in sleepwear. They would not approve of cartoon unicorns. A salesman proudly demonstrates a new mattress, pressing it with gloved hands and proclaiming its superior ability to conform to spinal curvature. Historians still argue whether mattress innovation actually improves sleep quality or whether the psychological reassurance of a scientifically approved mattress was the primary benefit. Either way, the Victorian obsession with measuring, testing, and optimizing every aspect of rest is undeniable. You spot warming pans resting on a small shelf near a fireplace. The copper vessels, filled with hot coals, were meant to heat the bed before sleep. The idea is simple. A warm bed encourages relaxation and discourages sudden nocturnal shivers. A quirky tidbit: some households heated multiple pans, tucking them strategically under blankets to create a precise gradient of warmth. One imagines modern electric blankets as their logical descendants, minus the charm of burning embers. You notice labels detailing proper care. Avoid dampness, lest the feathers clump. Do not overstuff, or spinal discomfort may ensue. And scent lightly with lavender for optimal dream clarity. It's remarkable how much care was devoted to even the smallest aspects of sleep, from the material of the sheets to the arrangement of pillows. Every object participates in the nightly choreography of rest. A young apprentice explains that woolen blankets are preferred for their ability to regulate temperature, and feather beds for their softness and insulation. You can't help but marvel at how seemingly simple objects were imbued with layers of meaning, comfort, status, and the subtle promise of scientific efficacy. As you wander, you notice the economic implications of sleep gear. Luxurious beds and nightwear were expensive, and only the middle and upper classes could afford top-tier items. Yet even modest households improvised. Dried herbs in cloth pouches, thin flannel sheets, or carefully layered blankets offered similar sensory reassurance, even if the aesthetic was more functional than elegant. A light joke enters your thoughts. Imagine a Victorian mattress salesman explaining, "This bed will not only support your spine, but also whisper sweet nothings to your nervous system." You can almost hear the pitch delivered with a perfectly practiced flourish, as if selling sleep were an art form unto itself. Whether or not that was true, it's a convenient excuse if you're the kind who blames a bad dream on everything, except last night's five-course supper. You linger over small nightstands and bedside tables, noting carafes, glasses, and tiny writing implements for those late-night reflections or sudden inspirations. Every element in the room has purpose: warmth, order, accessibility, and a subtle encouragement toward relaxation. It's almost as if the entire room conspires, softly and insistently, to lead the sleeper into the embrace of unconsciousness. And as you leave the boutique, stepping back into the misty street, you carry the sense that sleep in Victorian London was never a mere biological function. It was a curated experience, an economy, and a subtle social statement. Each mattress, blanket, and nightshirt was part of an intricate system designed to soothe nerves, signal virtue, and ideally keep the city's moral and physical order intact. You continue along the street, the glow of the shops fading behind you, now drawn toward the shimmering allure of the era of patent medicines. bottles promising sleep in liquid form, each more mysterious and enticing than the last. The fog thickens again as you turn down a narrow street, past shuttered windows and the occasional lantern swinging gently in the breeze. Ahead, a shop gleams under the gaslight. Bottles of every shape and size glint on polished shelves, each promising a different path to the elusive embrace of sleep. You step inside and are immediately enveloped in the sweet, slightly medicinal scent of tinctures and syrups. Welcome to the era of patent medicines, where bottled promises competed with careful rituals for your nighttime attention. Mainstream historical fact: by the late Victorian era, patent medicines were a booming industry. Apothecaries and traveling salesmen offered proprietary concoctions for sleeplessness, often claiming miraculous results. Some contained harmless herbs like valerian or chamomile, while others included alcohol, opium, or even more alarming substances. These medicines were marketed with beautiful labels and persuasive testimonials, creating both hope and mild anxiety that sleep might be just a bottle away. A quirky tidbit draws your eye. One particularly ornate bottle boasts a tiny illustration of a cherubic figure reclining on a crescent moon, captioned, "Guaranteed dreams or your money back." You smile at the Victorian flair for combining whimsy with commerce, imagining someone carefully shaking the bottle before bedtime and whispering, "Please let me dream of kittens and not creditors." You lift a small glass vial labeled Somnum Essence, a mixture of herbs, a hint of brandy, and a faintly sweet syrup. The shopkeeper insists it can induce sleep within an hour if taken with gentle breathing exercises. You try to imagine the sales pitch in your mind. Yes, this tiny bottle will rescue your restless nights, align your nerves, and maybe even pacify the moon itself. Historians still argue whether patent medicines were more harmful than helpful, or whether the combination of ritual, dosage, and belief provided the genuine soothing effect. Certainly the placebo element was powerful. Victorians loved both the promise and the performance of taking a medicine as much as the medicine itself. You notice a row of bottles labeled Nervine Elixir and Lullaby Drops, each promising more restful nights than the last. The labels gleam with ornate lettering, and small illustrations suggest sleeping children, serene adults, or peaceful landscapes. A light joke occurs to you. A Victorian child could probably recognize better packaging than most modern health supplements, which is both impressive and slightly intimidating. Historians still argue whether the rising cases of Victorian insomnia actually came from new technology, or whether people simply talked about sleeplessness more because newspapers and etiquette guides made it fashionable. Yes, fashionable. Imagine insomnia as a dinner party topic, delicately tucked between "my roses are failing to bloom" and "my husband may be emotionally unavailable." The shopkeeper hands you a small measuring cup, demonstrating the proper dosage. Too much, he warns, and you may dream of dancing elephants. You chuckle softly. Some substances indeed were potent enough to create vivid hallucinations rather than peaceful sleep, blurring the line between remedy and adventure. You peek behind the counter and notice some older bottles, corked and dusty, their labels nearly illegible. One bears the inscription, "Prepared for insomniacs and philosophers alike." The distinction is curious. Apparently, both groups were thought to suffer equally from overactive minds, though the remedies for each might differ slightly. Philosophers received a dash more brandy, perhaps. A fringe tidbit flutters past your awareness. Some bottles contained a mixture of hops, laudanum, and other herbal additives specifically designed to calm the humors. While modern readers may flinch at laudanum, in its time it was a socially acceptable way to soothe anxiety and encourage sleep, taken with the dignity of a daily ritual rather than recreational indulgence. You wander past a small card detailing the proper bedtime routine when taking these potions: warm bath, dim lights, gentle stretching, and finally a measured sip of the chosen elixir. The instructions suggest slow, deliberate breathing and quiet contemplation, blending chemical intervention with environmental and mental preparation. You recognize the logic. The ritual reinforces expectation and mental readiness, magnifying the effect of whatever is in the bottle. A soft joke drifts in. Victorian sleeplessness remedies seem less like medicine and more like a nightly performance, a play where the audience is both the patient and the critic. If you miss a cue, the plot or your dream might collapse entirely. You notice one last label that is particularly dramatic, the somnus tonic, for nights of endless thought and whirling imaginations. You imagine an anxious writer or young professional sipping this tonic, hoping it will quiet their swirling ideas just enough to surrender to the dark. As you leave the shop, the bottles glint faintly in the lamplight, promising sleep yet holding a whisper of adventure, a flicker of danger, and the unmistakable charm of Victorian ingenuity. The streets outside feel softer, slightly dulled by expectation and the promise of relief, drawing you toward the next chapter. The debates between doctors, quacks, and the quiet arguments over what truly keeps people awake. You continue down the slick cobblestone streets, the fog curling around your ankles as though curious to see where your journey leads next. The scent of herbs and patent medicines fades behind you, replaced by the faint tang of the river and the crisp cold of the night. Here, in the quiet spaces between shop fronts and street lamps, you encounter the debates among doctors, quacks, and curious amateurs. The intellectual battleground where insomnia was examined, theorized, and occasionally exaggerated. Mainstream historical fact. By the late 19th century, medical journals in Britain were filled with lively debates about the causes and cures of insomnia. Physicians argued over whether sleeplessness was primarily physiological, psychological, or moral in origin. Some claimed overexcited nerves and mental overstimulation, while others insisted that improper diet, irregular routines, or even emotional distress were the true culprits. You pause beside a narrow alley half filled with fog. A lamplighter, coat soot-streaked, carries a long pole tipped with a tiny flame. He nods at you, yawns, and mutters about never enough hours. You suspect he's been saying that for 20 years. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some quacks advocated placing a live toad under the bed as a method to draw away nightly disturbances. You pause and imagine the poor creature, squatting silently in the dark, while the insomniac counts imaginary sheep. And you chuckle softly, aware that Victorian creativity often straddled the line between ingenuity and absurdity. You pass a dimly lit lecture hall where a small crowd gathers to listen to a debate. One lecturer, a stout man with a monocle, argues passionately that reading by candlelight disrupts the nervous system, causing chronic insomnia. Another counters that such a restriction is excessive, pointing out that only those already predisposed to sleeplessness are likely to be affected. Historians still argue whether these discussions ever led to meaningful clinical improvements or whether they were mostly social theater. You take a slow breath, noting the tactile richness of the night, fog brushing your cheeks, cobblestones cold underfoot, and the distant chiming of a clock punctuating the intellectual tension of the debate. The lecture hall's windows are fogged, and you catch glimpses of inked notes, diagrams of the nervous system, and hastily drawn flowcharts mapping causes and treatments. It's earnest, chaotic, and strangely beautiful. A soft joke drifts through your mind. Imagine being the poor student forced to diagram nervous overexcitement leading to sleeplessness, using only chalk and candlelight. You would emerge not just exhausted, but morally judged by every Victorian in attendance. You pass a pamphlet stand outside the hall. Titles include Nervous Disorders of the Urban Mind and Insomnia, a moral and medical treatise. Some are scholarly, others are written by self-proclaimed sleep experts who have never examined a patient. Their remedies range from gentle teas to vibrating chairs, electric helmets, and, occasionally, recommendations to simply whisper apologies to the moon. You notice a small debate breaking out between two gentlemen near the doorway. One insists that insomnia is purely a disease of civilization, exacerbated by the clamor of urban life, while the other claims it is hereditary, a quirk of delicate nervous constitutions. Their voices rise in polite agitation, and you can almost see the invisible threads of social, medical, and personal anxieties weaving around them. Historians still argue whether Victorian debates about insomnia were primarily medical or moral exercises, or perhaps both, a reflection of a society obsessed with order, propriety, and the management of human bodies. You think about how modern discussions of sleep, apps, supplements, therapy, echo the same tensions between physiology, psychology, and lifestyle. A fringe tidbit slips in. Some amateur sleep theorists recommended midnight walks through foggy streets to exhaust the mind and body, occasionally adding whispered affirmations of virtue to align the spirit. You consider trying it yourself, if only for the surreal poetry of pacing along cobblestones while the city sleeps unevenly around you. You pause at a corner, listening to the distant echo of horse hooves and the gentle splash of water from the river. The intellectual energy of the city, focused on the restless mind, feels alive. Arguments, theories, and eccentric remedies all swirl together, shaping a landscape where insomnia is both a personal struggle and a societal concern. As you continue, you notice just how many homes still glow long after respectable bedtime. Behind each window lies someone pacing, scribbling, reading, or, if they're wealthy, ringing a bell for a servant to prepare yet another cup of warm milk. The Victorians adored warm milk. They also adored adding absolutely questionable ingredients to it, but we'll come back to that later. Consider that your first callback seed, gently planted like a confusing Victorian houseplant. A soft joke arises. The Victorians treated sleeplessness with everything from herbs to mechanical helmets, moral lectures to live toads. Yet you still can't help but think that if someone had simply handed people warm milk and a quiet chair, the same problems might have resolved quietly with far less drama. As you turn the corner, the street narrows, the fog deepens, and the promise of private bedrooms, domestic rituals, and the subtle choreography of nightly routines draws you forward, guiding you into the heart of Victorian nightly life. The narrow street opens into a quiet courtyard, lanterns flickering in the damp night, and you are drawn toward the bedroom preparations and domestic sleep rituals that define Victorian life. Beyond the public debates, the electric helmets, and patent medicines, the night was ultimately conquered, or at least negotiated, within the private spaces of homes, where careful routines, sensory control, and deliberate habits form the true architecture of sleep. Mainstream historical fact: Victorian families took great care in preparing bedrooms to optimize sleep. Households arranged beds, curtains, and nightstands with intention. Feather beds were fluffed, warming pans laid in blankets, and nightwear carefully selected for warmth, breathability, and modesty. The environment was considered integral to health, not merely comfort. A quirky tidbit: some households had small dream journals by the bed, encouraging children and adults alike to record dreams immediately upon waking. The belief was that capturing thoughts could prevent lingering anxieties and reduce future sleep disturbances. You imagine scribbling hurriedly by candlelight, hoping not to spill ink or miss the perfect phrasing of a fleeting nightmare. You enter a room where a maid is performing the nightly choreography, tucking sheets, adjusting pillows, lighting a small bedside lamp, and sprinkling dried herbs across the pillow. Historians still argue whether these rituals produced measurable physiological effects or whether the benefit was primarily psychological, a comforting repetition that eased anxious minds. Either way, the care invested in such routines is undeniable. The fire crackles in the hearth, sending warmth across the polished floorboards. A gentleman sits on the edge of his bed, slowly sipping warm milk, inhaling the subtle scent of lavender from the sachet at his pillow, and murmuring to himself. The milk's temperature is carefully gauged. Too hot, it will disturb the stomach. Too cold, and it fails to relax the muscles. Attention to detail defines every gesture. You notice a small wooden box on the nightstand, containing a mixture of chamomile, hops, and valerian. The act of measuring, grinding, and sprinkling the herbs is part of the ritual, an intimate preparation that signals to the mind that rest is imminent. A light joke crosses your thoughts. The Victorians were so thorough, you half expect a manual on how to bow to your blanket before sleeping. Night clothes, carefully laid out, are soft against the skin. Women's gowns and men's pajamas alike are chosen for both comfort and moral propriety. Even minor details such as sleeve length or the snugness of a collar were thought to affect warmth, circulation, and indirectly the quality of sleep. You imagine attempting to nap in a modern onesie after such careful preparation and chuckle at the contrast. A fringe tidbit floats into view. Some households recommended whispering small apologies or affirmations to the bed itself, believing that the furniture absorbed anxieties and released calm in return. While it sounds slightly absurd today, it reflects a deep understanding of ritual and symbolism, a precursor to modern cognitive behavioral techniques in some ways. A newspaper boy sprints past you shouting headlines about economic anxieties, political scandals, and the latest scientific claims. because nothing helps you sleep like mild existential dread delivered directly to your doorstep. One of the articles taped to a shop window claims a prominent physician has discovered a mathematical sequence for restful nights. Another insists the mind acts like a clock gear and must be wound down through strict ritual. You move closer to a small bedside table where a servant quietly stirs a cup of warm herbal tea, timing the preparation to coincide with the fading of the fire. Timing is everything. Sleep is guided by rhythm, repetition, and gentle cues that teach the body when to release tension and surrender to rest. The room is hushed except for the soft hum of the city outside and the occasional crackle from the fire. Curtains block stray light, rugs dampen footsteps, and every movement, by the maid, the householder, or the fire's flicker, is measured to maintain a calm environment. Sensory overload is minimized and subtle sensory cues like scent and warmth are maximized. A soft joke arises. If the Victorians could see modern bedrooms filled with phones, glowing screens, and chaotic schedules, they would probably recommend a small army of servants to restore order before even attempting a nap. You smile, acknowledging the irony that despite all technology, the same basic principles of controlled environment and ritual remain effective. And as you sit quietly in the corner of this room, observing the interplay of light, warmth, scent, and action, you recognize that the true power of Victorian sleep culture lies not in the medicines, machines, or moralizing, but in the meticulous orchestration of domestic life itself, a gentle, deliberate symphony designed to lull restless minds into calm. You step back into the night, leaving the carefully curated bedchamber behind, and find yourself thinking about the role of diet, beverages, and nighttime consumption in Victorian sleep practices. The streets are slick and quiet, the city muffled under fog, and yet the faint smells of taverns, bakeries, and kitchens remind you that what one ingests is never far from the body's ability to rest. Mainstream historical fact. Victorian doctors and etiquette manuals emphasize careful attention to meals and beverages in the hours before bed. Heavy, spicy, or late dinners were thought to overstimulate digestion and disrupt sleep. Lighter suppers, warm milk, and mild teas were preferred to encourage the body's natural preparation for rest. A quirky tidbit, some households served nightcaps that were anything but alcoholic. Ingredients included barley water, herbal infusions, or diluted wine infused with calming herbs like lavender or hops. A few eccentric families insisted on adding a pinch of ground almonds or even powdered rose petals. You imagine sipping such a concoction while the fog drifts past the window, feeling oddly like royalty in a miniature, fragrant palace. You notice that beverages were often warmed because warmth was believed to relax muscles and nerves. The act of preparing a cup of tea, pouring it into a favorite mug, and holding it in the hands was part of the ritual, an almost meditative prelude to rest. Historians still argue whether these practices had measurable physiological effects, or whether the calming result was largely due to the anticipatory ritual itself. Either way, the sensory experience, heat, smell, taste, and slow, deliberate motion played a major role. You wander past a small pastry shop, noting the faint aroma of almond cakes and lightly sugared tarts. Dessert was often discouraged late at night, as sugar was considered a stimulant, yet a carefully measured treat could be permissible in small quantities. You chuckle at the thought of someone meticulously counting sugar crystals, as if each one held sway over the night's peace. Meanwhile, the average Londoner is just trying not to die of cholera. A gentle joke arises. Imagine a Victorian mother scolding her child, not for being naughty, but for consuming a late slice of bread pudding, the very audacity threatening the nation's sleep and moral fiber. Sugar was a kind of tiny villain in the bedtime story of the era. You pass a tea merchant whose window displays neat rows of small tins labeled Sleepy Time Blend, Valerian Infusion, and Chamomile Calm. Patrons are encouraged to prepare these teas with care, steeping them just long enough to release fragrance but not bitterness. The act of preparing the tea becomes part of the nightly meditation, reinforcing the mind-body connection that Victorians were so keen to cultivate. A fringe tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some believe that the position of the spoon while stirring the tea, clockwise or counterclockwise, affected the infusion's ability to encourage sleep. You can't help but smile, recognizing how superstition and methodical science often danced hand in hand. You note that alcohol was a complicated subject. Small amounts of brandy or fortified wine were sometimes recommended as sleep aids, especially when combined with herbal infusions. But excessive drinking was widely discouraged. The Victorian debate around alcohol and sleep mirrors, modern discussions about relaxation versus disruption. You sip an imaginary cup of chamomile tea yourself, inhaling its faint, sweet aroma. The simple act feels grounding, even in the foggy streets, as if you've momentarily transported yourself into a Victorian kitchen where warmth, ritual, and sensory care converge. And as you continue your walk, you reflect on the interconnectedness of diet, beverage, and ritual. Each measured sip, each carefully timed bite, and each sensory cue contributes to a nightly symphony orchestrated for sleep, where the mundane becomes extraordinary, and every little detail nudges the body and mind closer to rest. You leave the scents of chamomile and warm pastries behind and walk toward the quieter, shadowed neighborhoods where aromatherapy, scents, and nighttime fragrances form another layer of Victorian sleep practices. Gas lamps flicker through the mist, painting long, soft shadows along the cobblestones, while the faint aroma of burning tallow mingles with lavender, rosemary, and more unusual concoctions drifting from open windows. Mainstream historical fact. Victorian households often employed scented sachets, burning incense, or infused pillows to influence sleep. Lavender, hops, and rosemary were among the most common, believed to calm the nerves and encourage restful slumber. This attention to olfactory stimuli reflects a sophisticated understanding of environmental factors in sleep hygiene. A quirky tidbit catches your attention. Some people carried miniature pomanders, small spheres of aromatic herbs or spices, close to their chest at night. The scent was thought to both protect against nightly disturbances and guide the mind gently toward dreams. You imagine a Victorian child clutching a tiny pomander, inhaling it as if drawing on invisible courage against the night. You pause outside a window, noticing a small bowl of dried herbs on a nightstand. Chamomile and lavender, yes, but also less conventional options like pennyroyal or mugwort. The combination is as much ritual as remedy. Selecting, crushing, and arranging the herbs is a deliberate act, signaling to both body and mind that sleep is imminent. Historians still argue whether these practices produced physiological effects or whether their primary efficacy lay in ritualized anticipation. A light drizzle begins to fall, the charming kind that makes your hair soft but slowly erases your will to live. The droplets hiss when they touch the gas flames, and the sound mixes with carriage wheels, distant river clatter, and a chorus of coughing from every direction. Victorians coughed like it was a competitive sport. Inside a bedroom, a woman gently sprinkles lavender on her pillow, inhaling the scent as if it carries away worry. The motions are deliberate, almost meditative. Even the smallest gestures, the fold of a sheet, the position of a cushion, enhance the sensory experience. Sleep in this context is orchestrated with care, where every touch and aroma nudges the nervous system toward calm. A soft joke surfaces. Imagine telling a modern insomniac that a pinch of crushed herbs on a pillow is the key to their recovery. They'd probably laugh and reach for a blue light screen instead, unaware that centuries ago, tiny aromas carried the weight of serious science. You notice another fringe detail. Some believe that hanging small bouquets of rosemary or hyssop over the bed would absorb bad dreams and protect the sleeper. You picture this almost like a botanical force field, fending off restless thoughts and nighttime anxieties. The blend of superstition, observation, and ritual feels distinctly Victorian, half science, half charm, and entirely dedicated to rest. Walking further, you notice that scents were also used to regulate timing. Some households burned a gentle incense at a set hour, a signal that bedtime had arrived. The ritualized smell functioned like a temporal cue for the nervous system, reminding the mind that it was time to release tension and enter sleep. A delicate joke flits through your thoughts. Imagine setting a timer for incense instead of checking your phone alarm. Victorians mastered the art of pre-digital reminders long before apps existed. The olfactory system becomes an intimate collaborator in the nightly choreography. You linger near a window where a small flame flickers beneath a bowl of hops and chamomile. You inhale gently, imagining the aromas seeping through the fabric of the night, wrapping the room and the mind in a soft, calming haze. The combined warmth, scent, and ritual create an environment designed for subconscious ease, a lullaby for the nervous system itself. And as you continue through the foggy streets, you realize that the Victorian attention to scent wasn't mere superstition or luxury. It was a sophisticated, multisensory strategy to guide the body and mind into sleep, harmonizing ritual, observation, and subtle environmental cues into a nightly symphony that whispers calm to anyone willing to listen. The fog has thinned slightly, revealing the silhouettes of large townhouses, and you feel yourself drawn toward the influence of literature, music, and bedtime entertainment on Victorian sleep. The streets are quieter here, but the faint strains of piano or a softly read story drift through open windows, reminding you that the mind must be soothed not only physically, but mentally before surrendering to slumber. Mainstream historical fact. Victorian culture emphasized the role of calm entertainment in preparing for sleep. Gentle music, reading light novels, or reciting poetry were all recommended to reduce anxiety and mental stimulation. Doctors and etiquette manuals frequently warned against intense reading or emotionally charged dramas late at night, suggesting instead that the mind be guided toward gentle contemplation. A quirky tidbit catches your attention. Some households played small mechanical music boxes or wind-up phonographs beside the bed, believing that repetitive, predictable melodies could synchronize nervous rhythms and ease the mind. Imagine tiny brass cylinders turning, producing soft, delicate tunes, each note an invisible push toward rest. You pass a watchmaker's shop, tiny gears displayed like precious jewels. In the window, a sign claims, "Timekeeping, the true key to restful nights," which frankly sounds like something a watchmaker would say. Here's another little joke for you. If Victorian London had motivational posters, one of them would absolutely say, "Sleep is just punctuality for the unconscious." You peek into a window and see a mother softly reading to a child from a well-worn book of fairy tales. The cadence of her voice, the gentle page turning, the predictable structure of the stories, all combine to signal safety and relaxation. Historians still argue whether such practices had measurable effects on sleep, or whether the benefit lay in structured attention, ritual, and the psychological reassurance of storytelling. Either way, the scene exudes warmth and purpose. You pass a parlor where a pianist's fingers move delicately across the keys, producing a series of slow nocturnes. The music is not for entertainment alone. It is a deliberate signal to the household that night has arrived, that activity should wind down, and that the body and mind may begin to surrender to rest. A soft joke drifts through your mind. You probably won't survive this if you try to skip the nocturnes for a raucous game of cards. Victorian nerves might never forgive you. A fringe detail surfaces. Some advocated reciting or memorizing poetry as a cognitive exercise to tire the mind subtly. Rhymes and rhythms were thought to distract from anxious thoughts, guiding the intellect toward patterns and away from disquieting concerns. You imagine a scholar, notebook in hand, whispering lines of Wordsworth or Tennyson as a personal soporific. You wander past small shops selling music boxes and children's storybooks, their windows lit with the soft glow of candlelight. Some books even included lullabies printed as sheet music alongside gentle illustrations, so the reader could sing or play as part of a calming routine. The integration of narrative and melody exemplifies the Victorian understanding of multisensory sleep preparation. Historians still debate whether music, stories, and cognitive exercises were universally effective or if their value was primarily social and ritualistic. Reinforcing structure, routine, and the household hierarchy while subtly nudging minds toward calm. The distinction between practical efficacy and cultural convention seems almost irrelevant when the atmosphere itself is so deliberately orchestrated. A quirky thought occurs. Imagine a Victorian teen rolling eyes at bedtime, mumbling complaints about poetry, unaware that the measured cadence of verse may, in fact, lull a stubborn mind toward rest. Even rebellion becomes part of the ritual, a gentle negotiation between authority, routine, and the nervous system. You pause outside a window, noting a small child leaning into a caregiver's lap while a music box plays nearby. The soft tones mingle with whispers of the story, the faint scent of lavender from the pillow, and the warmth of the hearth. Sleep is not forced here. It is invited, coaxed, and choreographed with attention to detail. And as you continue down the street, the interplay of music, literature, and bedtime ritual leaves a lingering sense. Victorian sleep culture extended far beyond beds and blankets. It was a holistic, multisensory endeavor where every note, word, and gesture contributed to the delicate transition from consciousness to rest, each household conducting its own nocturnal symphony. The fog is now a thin veil, revealing the distant silhouettes of chimneys and rooftops against a dimly lit sky. You are drawn toward the psychological and emotional strategies Victorians used to combat sleeplessness, subtle interventions designed to calm the restless mind and soothe anxious spirits. Here the battlefield is internal, yet as carefully cultivated as the most luxurious bedroom or the most precisely brewed herbal tea. Mainstream historical fact. Victorian doctors and self-help guides often recommended mental exercises to aid sleep. Techniques included controlled breathing, visualization, light meditation, and even writing down anxieties before bed. The aim was to quiet overactive thought patterns that could keep one awake through the long hours of night. When you're lying awake bargaining with your own brain, you keep wandering, boots tapping lightly as the streets curve toward the river. The Thames at night is a mirror for the city's neonless glow. A few lonely rowboats bob against the embankment, each tied to an iron ring that feels older than half the empire. A quirky tidbit. Some households instructed individuals to whisper worries to the walls or furniture under the belief that the inanimate objects could absorb the tension and release calm energy back to the sleeper. You picture someone leaning close to a wardrobe, confessing anxieties and chuckle at the intimate absurdity, though the psychological logic is clear. You pause in front of a townhouse where a family has dimmed the lights and closed the curtains. The soft rustle of pages turning indicates journaling, a nightly practice meant to transfer anxious thoughts from mind to paper. You recognize the brilliance. Once a worry is externalized, it loses some of its power, freeing the mind to drift toward rest. Historians still argue whether these mental interventions had measurable effects or whether their benefits were largely ritualistic and psychological. You move along a narrow corridor lined with street lamps that seem to flicker in gentle synchrony. Some Victorians employed guided visualizations, imagining themselves walking through quiet forests or floating along calm rivers. These exercises were meant to create a mental environment conducive to sleep, a precursor to modern cognitive behavioral techniques and relaxation therapies. A light joke arises. Imagine explaining to a modern insomniac that whispering your anxieties to a dresser or imagining a foggy river is exactly what a Victorian sleep manual recommends. Somehow the absurdity of it all is comforting, as if the universe itself conspired in favor of rest. You notice another family performing a gentle breathing exercise. Inhale slowly, hold, exhale deliberately. Rhythm is everything. The Victorians believed that aligning breath with bodily awareness could regulate heart rate, calm the nervous system, and create an ideal state for sleep. The simplicity of it contrasts with the complexity of their beds, teas, and scented sachets, yet complements them perfectly. A fringe tidbit. Some guides suggested mild self-massage of hands and feet before bed, believing that stimulating extremities could relax the whole body. You imagine tiny rituals unfolding quietly across the city, households performing nearly identical sequences without coordination, yet all in pursuit of the same elusive goal: sleep. You pass a small garden where moonlight strikes dewy leaves. Some Victorians recommended brief night walks or contemplative time outdoors, both to tire the body and to prepare the mind. They believed that exposure to fresh air and natural rhythms reinforced internal sleep cycles. You inhale the faint fragrance of night-blooming flowers, feeling the delicate balance between calm and alertness. A soft joke occurs. Imagine pacing foggy streets for mental hygiene while the neighbors think you're performing clandestine alchemy or plotting espionage. Yet the gentle cadence of steps, combined with the quiet night air, is undeniably soothing. You pause to reflect. All of these interventions, journaling, whispers, breathing, visualization, gentle walks, share a common thread. They acknowledge that sleep is not purely biological. It is a negotiation between mind and body, an art as much as a science. Each gesture, no matter how small, contributes to the delicate orchestration that guides restless individuals toward rest. As you watch the river stir, you can almost sense the collective restlessness of a society racing toward modernity, too fast to catch its breath. Factories roar, domestic schedules tighten, medical theories multiply, and sleeplessness becomes both a symptom and symbol of the age. And as you continue under the faint glow of gas lamps, you recognize that Victorian sleep culture is a tapestry woven from material, sensory, and psychological threads. Each element, herbs, mattresses, melodies, rituals, intersects with human consciousness, creating a carefully choreographed passage into the quiet, restorative sanctuary of night. The streets have emptied, leaving only the whisper of your footsteps and the occasional distant bell toll. You find yourself approaching the final stretch of Victorian sleep practices, the integration of social, environmental, and technological influences that subtly shape nightly rest across the city. Here, the cumulative effect of rituals, sensory cues, and domestic orchestration becomes clear, a holistic landscape where every detail, public or private, participates in the delicate art of sleep. Mainstream historical fact. By the late Victorian era, innovations like improved gas lighting, window design, and heating systems were considered integral to healthy sleep. Proper illumination, ventilation, and warmth were believed to regulate the body's rhythms and protect against both physical and moral disturbances during the night. Well-lit streets, carefully designed windows, and regulated room temperatures were marketed as essential to cultivating proper sleep hygiene. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some households installed small, night regulators, simple mechanical devices that ensured gas lamps dimmed slowly at predetermined hours. These were thought to gently cue the nervous system that bedtime had arrived, a forerunner to modern circadian rhythm lighting. You imagine the tiny gears clicking in synchronization, as if the house itself whispered, "It's time to rest now." You pass a street lined with houses that feature strategically placed shutters and curtains designed to keep light out and maintain warmth. Families considered the arrangement of furniture, rugs, and even paintings as part of the nightly ecosystem. The placement of a chair, the position of a footstool, or the orientation of a bed all played subtle roles in guiding sleep. Historians still argue whether these architectural considerations measurably improve sleep or whether they function more as psychological reassurance. You notice a small child peeking through a shutter, gazing at a softly glowing street lamp. The parents ensure the bedroom remains insulated from street noise and light, turning urban vigilance into a controlled, protective cocoon. The integration of environment, architecture, and household routine reflects the Victorian belief in a coordinated approach to well-being. Sleep is both nurtured and defended. A fringe detail drifts past. Some inventive households even synchronize curtains with the lunar cycle, adjusting window coverings subtly in accordance with the moon's phases to minimize nocturnal disturbances. It's an oddly poetic notion, blending superstition, observation, and nascent science into a singular nightly practice. You pass a final row of houses where the faint murmur of family life persists. Gentle sounds, pages turning, soft footsteps, a lullaby hummed at a window, merge with the ambient city hum. The careful orchestration of environment, from temperature to light to sound, forms an invisible network guiding each occupant toward rest. A soft joke flits through your mind. Imagine a Victorian neighbor peeking over a window, seeing you pacing the street, whispering to furniture, and holding a pomander. They would nod knowingly, thinking, "Ah, yes, the nightly negotiation of mind, body, and cosmos." In fact, nearly every household participates in some variation of this nocturnal ballet. A man nearby mutters about nerve weakness, one of the era's favorite diagnoses. Another whispers about brain heat, which absolutely sounds like something you get when you nap under too many blankets. A third complains that his dreams have become too vivid, and honestly, same. And as you continue your walk, it becomes clear that Victorian sleep culture is neither simple nor linear. It is a layered symphony of domestic care, sensory cues, rituals, and environmental control, each element reinforcing the others, creating a world in which sleeplessness is addressed from multiple angles, sometimes serious, sometimes whimsical, but always intentional. The city sleeps, or at least it appears to. Within each home, lights dim, beds are warmed, teas and tonics taken, music plays softly, journals are closed, and the anxious mind is slowly guided into the quiet. You sense the careful choreography of human ingenuity, a society determined not merely to survive the night, but to transform it into a deliberate, comforting passage. Now, as you slowly drift from the streets and homes of Victorian London, allow yourself to settle into a softer rhythm. The fog has thinned to a gentle mist, the faint gas lights fading into memory, and your senses begin to feel the quiet weight of night. Imagine the warmth of a carefully fluffed feather bed, the faint scent of lavender drifting from a sachet, and the gentle hush of a household devoted to rest. Each tiny ritual, the sip of warm milk, the turning of a page, the soft notes of a music box, becomes a thread, weaving a delicate cocoon around your mind and body. Let your breathing slow, synchronizing with the imagined rise and fall of the Victorians' controlled, thoughtful rhythms. Inhale gently, exhale, and feel the accumulated anxieties of your day begin to settle. Remember the meticulous care placed in every object, every action, and every scent. Even the quirkiest practices, whispering to furniture, hanging herbs over the bed, or pacing quietly under moonlight, contribute to a larger tapestry of calm, a gentle choreography designed to cradle the restless mind. Allow the streets, the shops, and the softly lit rooms to fade from view, leaving only the serene patterns of breath, warmth, and quiet reflection. Picture the quiet hum of the city beyond your window, distant and protective, while your own space becomes a sanctuary for rest. The combined wisdom of centuries, environment, ritual, scent, sound, and thoughtful habit, guides you effortlessly toward a gentle surrender. Feel your muscles loosen, your thoughts slow, and your mind begin to drift into a space where time stretches, soft and unhurried. The world outside, with its fog, lanterns, and distant bells, exists only as a comforting lullaby, a rhythm that mirrors your own internal cadence. Let the soothing weight of these gentle Victorian practices cradle you, knowing that centuries of intention, observation, and care have converged here for your rest. And now as your body nestles into imagined warmth and quiet, allow the final remnants of wakefulness to melt away. Each breath is softer, each heartbeat slower, each thought lighter. You are cocooned in history, in ritual, in care, ready to drift fully into sleep, gently guided by the echoes of an era devoted to the art of rest. Victorian life may feel distant, but the anxiety buzzing in the fog, that part feels startlingly familiar. You stand in the dim halo of a street lamp, inhaling the dusky chill as the city hums and fidgets like a person who drank too much tea before bed. You aren't here to fix anything. You're simply here to walk, to watch, to drift through this restless landscape where people are just beginning to ask, in earnest, why sleep slips through their fingers like coal dust. And as the fog curls around your feet like a sleepy cat, you continue forward into deeper streets, deeper nights, and deeper questions about the strange, soft science behind Victorian insomnia. You continue along the dim, glistening street until the fog thins just enough for you to notice a brass plaque swinging on a doorway ahead. It reads Institute for Nervous Disorders and Nocturnal Troubles, which honestly sounds like the Victorian version of a YouTube comment section at 4 a.m. Still, you're curious, and curiosity in the Victorian era usually leads to either discovery or syphilis. So let's hope discovery wins tonight. You push open the door. It creaks in that theatrical, horror movie way. Doors only creak when they know you're trying to relax. Inside, you step into a warm parlor where a low fire crackles and a handful of patients recline stiffly on elegant chaise longues. They don't look ill so much as deeply confused, as if unsure whether they're being healed or politely judged. You tread softly across the carpet that smells faintly of lavender and old furniture wax. Here in this little temple of early sleep science, you find doctors and thinkers trying, sometimes admirably, sometimes disastrously, to define insomnia in an age when nerves were treated like delicate lace doilies. A physician in a crisp frock coat approaches you, spectacles perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. He peers at you with the enthusiasm of a man who has spent far too many nights diagramming dreams. Insomnia, he proclaims, results from an overwhelmed cerebral mechanism. His voice drips with confidence, like someone who has read exactly one clever book and decided he invented the printing press. He gestures toward a chalkboard covered in spirals and arrows connecting phrases like mental taxation, excessive musings, and overactivation of the imagination. And because it is a Victorian night, you probably won't survive this, at least not without accidentally ingesting some questionable tonic, stepping into a suspicious fog, or trusting a doctor who absolutely should not be trusted. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're awake right now, funnily enough, you might as well tell me your location and local time down in the comments. You resist the urge to point out that overactivation of the imagination sounds suspiciously like what happens when you read one mildly spooky Wikipedia article before bed. Still, Victorians were genuinely trying to understand how sleep works. Mainstream fact: by the 1870s, British medical journals began publishing serious discussions on insomnia as a medical condition rather than a moral failing or personal quirk. Doctors tried to parse its causes using the tools available to them: observation, experimentation, and, very often, a tiny sprinkle of, "I have no idea, but let's pretend." Across the room, a young woman in a demure blue gown sits with a notebook open. She's recording her nightly sleep patterns under doctor's orders. You peek over her shoulder and spot entries like "dreamt of geese made of smoke" and "woke at 2:27 a.m. after thinking too hard about embroidery." You appreciate her honesty. You've also been defeated by a hobby before. Another patient, a mustached gentleman with an elaborate waistcoat, complains to the doctor that he cannot sleep because the world is too modern. He blames trains, newspapers, coffee, intellectual ladies, and anything else that moves faster than a snail. The doctor nods sympathetically, scribbling notes that look suspiciously like doodles of spirals. You drift deeper into the room, your footsteps softened by thick rugs. The air feels strangely heavy, tinged with that particular Victorian blend of ambition and medical uncertainty. Here they want desperately to understand the mind, but they don't yet have the language of REM cycles, hormones, or circadian rhythms. Instead, they frame the brain as a finely crafted machine, prone either to undercranking or overcranking. And this is where your quirky tidbit enters quietly, like a cat slinking into the parlor. Some Victorians believed you could literally hear the overwhelmed mind. They described sensations of clicking gears or miniature hammers inside the skull, convinced these phantom noises were signs of neurological strain. Modern science calls those feelings anxiety. Victorians called them cerebral noises of mechanical origin, because of course they did. As you settle into a velvet chair, one that squeaks slightly under your weight, as if protesting, you observe a demonstration. A doctor stands beside a patient, reclining with his hands folded. The doctor holds a metronome, ticking gently. The room listens. "Observe," he announces. "If the mind is a machine, we must reset its rhythm." He sets the metronome ticking faster, then slower, attempting to entrain the man's inner tempo to something restful. You watch it tick, tick, tick. And honestly, it's kind of soothing. You feel your own breathing fall in step with the metronome, like your brain is saying, "Yes, this is fine. We are machinery now." The patient, however, whispers that he feels oddly synchronized with the furniture. He looks mildly alarmed, but that's fine. Victorians were always mildly alarmed. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Historians still argue whether these early sleep experiments actually helped people, or whether they were more like proto-ASMR sessions wrapped in pseudoscientific bravado. Some believe they marked the beginning of modern sleep science. Others say they were no more effective than a warm bath and a stern talking to. A doctor invites you to examine a small wooden box filled with sleep measuring tools. Inside are tuning forks, a sand timer, several feathers, and a bell. You nod as if all this makes perfect sense. The feather, he explains, is for testing the responsiveness of nerves. The bell? For monitoring nocturnal disturbances. You do not ask how often patients are startled awake by the bell itself. Another patient complains that his dreams have become too narrative-driven, which is honestly the most Victorian complaint imaginable. You almost tell him about binge-watching entire TV seasons in one sitting, but you decide he isn't ready for that kind of cultural stress. A physician scribbles on a clipboard, insisting that sleeplessness is caused by the tyranny of thought. He then prescribes what is essentially the Victorian version of journaling before bed. His method includes listing one's worries in descending order of moral urgency, which is extremely funny because the Victorians believed everything had moral urgency, tea included. The fire crackles. A clock ticks softly from the mantel. You feel yourself lulled by the room's gentle hum, even as Victorian science strains to articulate the mystery of sleep. They're trying, earnestly, awkwardly, to build a bridge between the mechanical and the emotional, between body and mind, between your buzzing thoughts and the soft, dark space where dreams live. And as you step back into the hallway, the fog waiting outside once again curls around the threshold like it missed you. You realize something quietly profound. Even in all their theories, their charting, their mechanical metaphors, these doctors were really just trying to help people feel less alone at night. You push the door open, re-entering the cool haze, and continue through the restless city, toward the shelves of remedies and herbal concoctions, waiting in the next stretch of your journey. You step out into the damp London streets again, carrying with you the faint scent of lavender, candle smoke, and slightly anxious perspiration from the parlor. The fog swirls around your ankles like a restless cat, nudging you forward toward the promise of something softer, herbs, teas, and the strange, comforting domestic rituals that Victorians leaned on when sleep betrayed them. You follow the faint glow of shop windows where handwritten signs advertise restorative chamomile and valerian for gentle dreams. You pause before a small apothecary. Inside, shelves are lined with jars, bottles, and tiny paper packets, each promising relief from the night's tyranny. Mainstream historical fact: Victorian households routinely kept herbal remedies on hand. Chamomile, valerian, hops, and sometimes even poppy-infused concoctions were considered reliable sleep aids. The goal was simple: coax the body into rest without touching the burgeoning array of patent medicines, though we'll get to those later. A quirky tidbit flutters past you like a moth. Some Victorians believed that hanging a small pouch of dried sleeping herbs under your pillow could attract dreams directly from the ether, or possibly scare off mischievous spirits who were thought to play pranks on restless sleepers. It sounds cute, until you imagine accidentally sprinkling chamomile all over your nightshirt and waking up smelling like a floral explosion for a week. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander the aisles, brushing fingers over the labels, inhaling scents both soothing and strange. Lavender smells familiar. Valerian smells vaguely like old gym socks. You notice a small note tucked behind one jar. Historians still argue whether valerian's effect was mostly physiological or entirely placebo, but never underestimate the power of belief at 11 p.m. That feels reassuring in a way. A shopkeeper wearing a slightly faded waistcoat and an expression somewhere between hope and exhaustion gestures toward a copper kettle bubbling over a tiny stove. "Try a cup," he says. "Steeped 15 minutes, stirred clockwise, spoken to kindly. It helps, or so we've found." You can't resist. The ritual feels important, like the brewing itself is half the medicine. You stir, inhaling the deep, earthy aroma, and sip cautiously. The warmth spreads slowly, like a hand pressing gently against your temples. You overhear a discussion between two women examining a shelf of concoctions. One swears by a mixture of hops and rose petals, claiming it sends her into the softest, dreamless sleep. The other prefers valerian tincture and brandy, small doses only naturally, or she might find herself wandering her own bedroom in the middle of the night, muttering lines of poetry to the furniture. You quietly wonder which is worse, sleeplessness or sleep in someone else's apartment, narrating epic soliloquies to the carpet. A mild joke surfaces. Victorian insomnia remedies, in truth, might have worked mostly because they offered structure, ritual, and the comforting belief that someone, somewhere, knew what they were doing. Imagine modern sleep apps promising the same effect, only with blinking lights and algorithmic warnings about caffeine after noon. Not much has changed. You notice a handwritten sign pinned to the wall. Nightly anxiety may be tamed by warm milk and gentle conversation. The Victorian domestic eye for minutia is astounding. They believed the body and soul were delicately intertwined. Too much social stimulation, too little order, or even a disagreeable floorboard creaking could upset the nightly balance. You nod to yourself. If sleep is a houseplant, Victorians are at least watering it conscientiously. The shopkeeper shows you a small tin labeled dream dust, essentially a mixture of chamomile, lavender, hops, and, mysteriously, ground almonds. For those whose minds wander too far, he says, you imagine sprinkling it over your pillow while whispering apologies to the ghosts of your unread emails. Some Victorians believe scattering herbs in the bedroom invited sleep directly from the moon, a comforting notion, even if modern scholars still argue whether these practices had any actual physiological effect or were simply soothing superstitions. You wander past tiny kettles simmering, jars of bark and roots, and even a bottle marked Essence of Valerian, very strong. A child asleep on a nearby bench snores gently despite the chaotic melange of scents and sounds. You marvel at how simple domestic routines, stirring, steeping, tucking, were deployed as gentle weapons against sleeplessness. These remedies are tactile, deliberate, human. They transform waiting into action, restlessness into care. You trudge deeper into the mist, coat collar turned up, senses muted by the way the city seems to inhale and exhale beneath its soot-thick sky. Above you, chimneys spit out thin streams of smoke, dissolving into the haze. The air tastes faintly of coal and river water, and you catch yourself wondering how anyone sleeps in a city buzzing like a telegraph wire. You sip another small cup of herbal tea, feeling the warmth spiral from your chest outward. The fog outside has thickened, but you hardly notice. You are enveloped in the gentle insistence of routine, in the sensory lullaby of scent, heat, and soft clinking porcelain. And as you leave the apothecary, carrying your cupped warmth through the damp streets, you notice tiny bundles hanging from doorknobs and beams, pouches of herbs, folded and stitched with careful hands. Victorians, it seems, were trying to bend nature to their will, or at least to convince themselves they could, one gentle ritual at a time. You keep walking, past the glimmer of gas lamps, past shutters closing with a polite creak, thinking of all the little bottles, teas, and pouches waiting to nudge people into dream. And somewhere, in the soft night, the city exhales, letting you drift a little closer to the science and the ritual of sleep. You press onward, guided by the muted glow of gas lamps, the streets now quieter as most pedestrians retreat to beds that may or may not grant them rest. Ahead, you spot a small, curious shop tucked between a haberdasher and a tailor. Its window is cluttered with oddities, a helmet bristling with wires, a tiny spinning wheel, and a contraption that hums faintly, as if it has just woken from a nap itself. You step closer, drawn by both curiosity and the faint mechanical buzz that tickles the edges of your consciousness. Inside, the proprietor, a wiry man with spectacles that seem to magnify his eyes into small moons, greets you with a nod. This is the realm of electric dreams and odd devices, where Victorians believed science could be persuaded to lull the mind into sleep. You eye a small helmet lined with copper wires. Ah, yes, he says proudly, the cerebral relaxer. A mild current stimulates the nerves while the mind unwinds. You imagine wearing it, buzzing gently like a startled bumblebee, and suppress a shiver. Mainstream fact. By the late 19th century, experiments with electricity, magnetism, and mechanical vibration were fairly common in attempts to treat insomnia. Devices ranged from vibrating chairs to metal headpieces that were said to calm overexcited neural pathways. Some patients swore by them. Others, predictably, swore at them. A fringe tidbit catches your attention. On a small shelf, a glass tube emits a faint blue glow. The label reads, "Nightly phosphorescence, attunes mind to lunar rhythms." Some enthusiasts genuinely believed exposure to subtle light frequencies could coax the body into a rhythm more natural than candlelight alone. Modern science would shrug, but the Victorians took it seriously. demonstrating a combination of ingenuity and desperation that feels oddly charming. You reach for a small spinning wheel, its handle polished smooth. The proprietor explains that gentle mechanical motion can mimic the soothing cadence of rocking or walking, allowing the mind to gradually relax. Tick tock, he murmurs as he demonstrates. You almost feel your eyelids droop in time with the tiny rotation. The principle is basic, really. Repetitive, predictable motion often signals safety to the brain. Of course, he calls it entrainment of cerebral rhythms, because that sounds far more scientific than rocking in a chair. Victorians didn't have the word overstimulated, but they absolutely lived it. The Industrial Revolution blasts along the Thames like a restless heartbeat, machines clattering, factories glowing late into the night, newspapers shouting the latest scandalous headline. And here you are, dodging a puddle that might either be rainwater or, let's just hope it's rainwater. Historians still argue whether these early electrical and mechanical treatments provided tangible physiological benefits, or whether their efficacy was mostly psychological, a placebo wrapped in gleaming brass and copper wires. You consider that maybe it doesn't matter. Rituals, even odd ones, have a power all their own. You spot another curious device, a small wooden box connected to a coil and a bell. The proprietor explains, this monitors micro-awakenings. Should the patient stir, a gentle bell reminds them to breathe deeply and relax. You blink. In modern terms, it's a proto-biofeedback device, though the bell might also give you a minor heart attack if you're not careful. A light joke flits across your mind. Imagine trying to explain this to someone in 2025. Yes, we use copper helmets, spinning wheels, and softly ringing bells to make people sleep. They would probably nod politely and then never invite you to a party again. Still, you appreciate the creativity. Necessity, after all, is the mother of invention, or at least the mother of bizarre sleep contraptions. You try on a small helmet for fun. The faint buzz against your temples is oddly soothing, though slightly ticklish. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself suspended between the ticking city and the quiet hum of early modern science. It is intimate, almost tender, this attention to the nervous system and its tiny disturbances. A young woman peeks from behind a curtain, holding a vibrating pillow. She assures you that gentle oscillations over the chest and shoulders encourage nerve fibers to relax, adding that some clients drift off mid-demonstration. You note her quiet professionalism, tinged with the earnestness of someone who believes wholeheartedly in the magic of measured movement. Electricity, magnetism, vibrations, and subtle lights. Victorians tried it all. Some experiments were harmless, some a little alarming, and some, well, let's just say they would make today's health inspectors faint. Yet the drive behind these inventions was sincere, to translate sleep into a science that could be measured, tinkered with, and perfected. As you step back onto the foggy street, your fingers tingling faintly from the copper helmet, you realize that Victorian insomnia wasn't merely a nuisance. It was a puzzle, a canvas, a challenge that inspired invention, ritual, and occasional absurdity. The city around you remains restless, yet for a moment, the gentle hum of machinery, the faint glow of lights, and the tactile promise of these odd devices create a lullaby of their own. And so you trudge onward, curiosity piqued and senses subtly soothed, toward the quiet, measured rituals of the bedroom. The next stop on this gentle Victorian journey. You follow the soft, wet glow of the street lamps until the fog begins to lift just enough to reveal the front of a stately Victorian home. Heavy drapes blot out the street beyond, and a faint smell of burning coal wafts from the hearth within. This is the space where bedchambers of quiet rituals transform the abstract science of insomnia into tangible, tactile routines. You step inside, the creak of the door echoing like a punctuation mark in the hush of evening. The room smells warm and comforting, a blend of polished wood, dried herbs, and the faint tang of soot from the fireplace. Mainstream fact: Victorian bedrooms were meticulously arranged to encourage sleep. Furniture was placed thoughtfully, draperies blocked stray light, and nightstands often held glass carafes of water, journals, and small collections of herbs like lavender or hops. Each object, it was believed, could coax the body into a calm state, preparing both mind and senses for rest. One mainstream historical fact slips into your path the way a stray newspaper sheet does. By the mid-19th century, London was one of the most sleepless cities on earth, swelling with nearly 3 million people and enough noise to make silence feel like a myth. Insomnia, once merely a personal complaint, had become a recognized problem, something doctors, clergymen, and curious neighbors all poked at like a loose floorboard. A fringe tidbit catches your eye. Some households kept tiny dream bottles under pillows, filled with water infused with flower petals, a practice believed to either attract pleasant dreams or trap nightmares. The very thought of shaking up a little flower petal potion and hoping it would chase away bad dreams strikes you as charmingly optimistic, if not entirely effective. You move closer to the fire, the flickering light casting soft shadows that make the wallpaper seem alive. The room's rhythm is deliberate. A caregiver or servant might move quietly, extinguishing candles one by one, fluffing pillows, or drawing the curtains with a gentle, habitual motion. These acts, trivial in isolation, collectively form a nightly choreography, a ballet designed to calm the body and mind before sleep. Historians still argue whether these elaborate bedtime routines actually improve sleep quality, or whether their effectiveness was primarily psychological, a comforting structure that reassured the anxious Victorian mind. Either way, the rituals were taken very seriously. People would measure water temperature in wash basins, test mattress softness by rolling a small ball across it, and even lightly warm night clothes by the embers to avoid sudden chills. A gentle joke springs to mind. You probably won't survive a Victorian bedtime if you're the kind who insists on flopping onto a bed and scrolling your phone. Here, everything has a place, and every motion is meant to soothe. A candle is tilted just right, a quilt is tucked precisely under the chin, and even the sound of the wind outside is interpreted through the lens of relaxation or disturbance. You examine a small nightstand, noticing a handwritten note. If mind wanders, sip warm milk and hum a tune quietly to yourself. This might seem quaint, but the Victorians believed in the tangible impact of sound, taste, and warmth on sleep. Humming, in particular, was thought to regulate breathing and heartbeat, a precursor to modern meditative techniques. A servant quietly fans embers in the hearth while another arranges herbs in a small bowl on the bedside table. You notice the deliberate care in their movements, almost ritualistic. Everything is orchestrated to ensure that sleep is approached as an intentional, almost sacred act, rather than a mere biological necessity. A young lady sits on the edge of her bed, adjusting the folds of her nightdress. She opens a leather-bound journal and begins a brief entry, recording worries, thoughts, or hopes. Journaling was recommended as a nightly exercise, the act of writing outsourced anxious thoughts from the mind onto paper. Another quirky tidbit: some people would even whisper their worries to the furniture or walls, convinced that the very act of articulation could release mental tension. You notice the lighting in the room is dim but deliberate. Gas lamps are shielded with colored glass, or small shaded candles are placed so the glow spreads evenly, avoiding sharp contrasts that might startle the eyes. Sleep was believed to be disrupted not just by noise or physical discomfort, but by sensory irregularity. A sudden flicker could jolt the nerves, undoing the careful prelude to rest. The furniture, too, is chosen with care. Feather-stuffed mattresses, wool blankets, and carefully arranged pillows signal an understanding of ergonomics, albeit in a Victorian idiom. Some beds even had raised canopies, not just for privacy but to trap warmth and quiet drafts, a combination of practical and psychological comfort. You sit briefly in a chair near the window, listening to the soft rhythm of the fire, the distant hum of the gas lamps outside, and the faint creak of the floorboards. The sensory environment has been carefully curated. Warmth, muted light, gentle aromas, and quiet movements converge to form a sanctuary for rest. The room itself seems to inhale with you, as if aware of your need for calm. You pass a boarding house window glowing warm amber. Inside, a woman sits upright in bed, knitting in the dark hours because sleep refuses to come. She's one of countless nightly wanderers of the mind. Her doctor probably told her to avoid overly emotional novels or stimulating thoughts, because obviously the real danger is thinking too hard about anything after sunset. A light-hearted observation: remember the humming bell devices from the electric sleep shops? Here rhythm is achieved naturally. No copper, no wires, just the orchestration of simple, deliberate motions and soft human sounds. You can see why some Victorian households relied more on ritual than on any gadgetry. And as you lean back slightly, feeling the warmth radiate from the hearth and the careful calm of the room wrap around you, you begin to understand the intimacy of these nightly routines. Sleep for the Victorians was not just a physical act. It was a performance of care, mindfulness, and deliberate orchestration. The room itself participates in the nightly lullaby, guiding body and mind toward the delicate threshold of slumber. Outside, the city continues to stir, but inside these bedchambers, order, warmth, and ritual hold sway, demonstrating that even in an age of industry and chaos, humans sought comfort in the deliberate architecture of rest. The night outside the bedchamber windows is quiet now, but not entirely peaceful. You step back onto the fog-laden streets, where gas lamps drip halos onto slick cobblestones, and the distant clatter of a carriage reminds you that life doesn't pause for anyone's insomnia. Here in the chill of the evening, you start to hear whispers of something larger than sleeplessness, the moral panic around insomnia that swept through Victorian society. It wasn't just a medical concern, it was framed as a cultural and spiritual crisis. You pass a chapel tucked between a baker and a perfumer, its doors slightly ajar. Inside, the soft murmur of a late-night sermon drifts to the street. The preacher speaks of restless nights as a symptom of moral decay, of a mind overactive because the soul has strayed. Mainstream historical fact. In Victorian discourse, sleeplessness was frequently interpreted as a sign of ethical or spiritual imbalance. Doctors, clergy, and writers alike connected late-night wakefulness with moral weakness, indulgence, or intellectual corruption. The idea was that proper sleep wasn't just for health, it was a mark of a virtuous life. A quirky tidbit floats past your ears. Some clergymen went so far as to prescribe nightly prayers timed to the phases of the moon, convinced that the heavens themselves could realign a sinner's restless mind. And yes, it sounds like astrology crashed a sermon, but in the context of Victorian anxiety over social change, it was considered entirely reasonable. You walk past a newspaper kiosk where a headline reads, "Sleepless Youth Threaten Moral Fiber of the Empire." People stop to glance, nod gravely, or roll their eyes. The rhetoric frames insomnia as a societal menace, an almost contagious condition that could corrode the moral backbone of neighborhoods, families, and, potentially, the empire itself. Historians still argue whether this moral framing genuinely influenced sleep behaviors, or whether it was more about social control and reinforcing cultural norms. Either way, it's clear that sleeplessness was never purely personal. It was a matter of public concern. You can almost feel the invisible weight of judgment pressing in from every direction, like the fog curling around your ankles. You pass a shopkeeper who, noticing your lingering gaze at the street sermon, mutters something about lazy nerves and books corrupting young minds. You smile faintly because you recognize that this conflation of mental overstimulation and moral weakness would persist in advice columns, etiquette books, and even medical journals for decades.